The Biden campaign declined to comment on what Hasan said about voting, but it has made, dude, that is so funny to ask the Biden campaign what they have to say about my statement on voting. I did the Wired podcast, it was on conspiracy theories. I think it's kind of funny because, like, I don't know. We talked for like an hour and a half, and I think they like cut it down a lot. I don't know what came of it. Like, we had a long ass conversation about a bunch of different things. Oh, they wrote an article on it too. Hasan Piker won't tell you to vote for Joe Biden. Twitch streamers could have serious impact on the election even by sitting it out. So I feel like that became like the major point of contention. But overall, the conversation was so much more. And I think that they're just like clickbaiting by putting that in there. They think you have that much sway. I think that they think I do, which is kind of cool in a way. You're pissing off the libs again. Trump supports stopping bodily autonomy for women. Biden does not. Trump supports taking healthcare away from tens of millions of people. Biden does not. I've one excited to watch two 80-year-old men yap about a bunch of issues they almost completely align on with respect to policy while acting as though they're miles apart from one another. Immigration, Israel-Palestine tariffs are out on that front. The key focus has to be on abortion. Yeah, I said that knowing full well that liberals would get mad, because that is a conversation that I want liberals to hyper-focus on. I want liberals to recognize that, like, every single instance where we have this conversation, the issues keep whittling away. Obviously, there's supposed to be much daylight between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And yet, as time has gone on, as time has passed over the course of the past 4 years, for example, it seems rather odd that the issues that you could push back on have gotten less and less. You know what I mean? There's like obviously major issues that you can always say like Biden is different on. And I would never in a million years argue against that, right? I'm not going to sit here and be like, the Republican Party is great on abortion. It's not. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm a fan of the Republican Party at all. But it is kind of wild that over the course of the past 4 years, under the Biden agenda, under the Biden regime, we have absolutely whittled away some of those key differences. What about things like labor, man? Such an important issue. Exactly. You are absolutely 100% correct. Ironic that you brought that up, because I did literally talk about that quite extensively on the Wired magazine's podcast, where we talked about the Biden administration's like major issue with communications, because in areas where they are good and quite frankly better than every other contemporary administration, and I openly state this all the time, as you guys know, like labor, right? They are literally better than the Obama administration, better than every other administration that came prior. Like all contemporary administrations, none of them come close to the Brandon administration. They're great on utilizing the federal agencies, right? There are so many things that they do that are decent, except there are glaringly obvious problems in the Biden administration's mishandling of foreign policy that are unconscionable, that people genuinely, understandably have a distaste for. And the expectation that, lesser issue voting or lesser evil voting will keep them afloat. The expectation that like people will just forget about a lot of these other problems and we won't even need to actually communicate what our issues are, communicate what the white paper is on any of these policies to at least like the most passionate aspects of the fan base is utterly unimaginably nutty. But yeah, so we did a podcast. I don't know what the podcast looks like. Like, I don't know what they cut out, what they kept in. But this was, I would say this was like the only point of contention of the podcast, because like both of the journalists, who were wonderful people, by the way, former Vice, former Vox, a part of that like circuit, they were kind of shocked about what I said about like my advocacy for unconfirmed or like not voting for Joe Biden in the primaries, at least. We talked about how scary that is. And I did what I always do and try to explain to people that like it is scary and that they should be scared and that they should at the very least try to message, like make a calculation internally and try to offer a good faith initiative to say like, no, we do care about young voters. Like, please vote for us. Like, here's what we're doing. Right. The podcast was really calm. You sounded great. Yeah, because they were great. They were wonderful people. The left's favorite political Twitch streamer, Hasan Piker, doesn't know if he's voting for President Joe Biden, doesn't care if you do either. Nearly every day, Piker streams on Twitch for around 8 hours. There was more than 2.6 million followers on the platform. He's not a household name by any means, but he's become one of the most influential political commentators for Gen Z and young millennial audiences online over the past 4 years. 3 years ago, he hosted Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on his Twitch stream to play Among Us and urged his audience to go out and vote. So it matters if he doesn't support Biden. Let's talk about it. Hasan has never been the biggest Biden fan, so his disregard for the top of this year's ticket is not much of a surprise. But on the Wired Politics Lab podcast this week, when Leah Feiger, our host and my editor, asked Piker about it, he said he wouldn't support any candidates this year before ultimately replying, I don't know if I'll be voting for Biden. I'll be honest. If you think that lesser evil voting is working for you, if it makes you feel better, go ahead, he told us. One thing he definitely backs is voting uncommitted. I'm an advocate for full-blown pressure, he said. Biden shouldn't expect any of the little support Piker offered last time around. I urged and lent support to Joe Biden in the last election. There were a lot of promises that he made in the last election on domestic policy, codifying Roe v. Wade, protecting abortion rights, and immigration. He was going to basically reverse everything that Donald Trump had done, and he did none of that. Biden's administration has actually had a lot of successes, but even when Biden secures significant funding for a project or a campaign promise, his team has never been good at relaying that to voters. This is actually something I admitted as well. We had this conversation as well. I don't know if they kept that in the podcast or not, but I said what I always say, which is I like how progressive the Biden administration is when it comes to the NLRB, when it comes to its agencies. You got the FTC, you got the NLRB, you got like the SEC. These guys are all actually legitimately doing work, whereas like under the Trump administration, they would not be. Trump very openly advocates and successfully will like maybe not abolish these institutions, but who knows in the second time around, but at least like he will reduce them deliberately. Like he won't fulfill cabinet roles and things like that on purpose, right? Like, so there, that is a major issue. So that is definitely something to consider. But that gets at the communication of it all. And Hasan also touched on something pertinent that voting seems to be talking about this week, the youth vote. Where was it? His team has never been good about relaying that to voters. Even Biden's TikTok is barely about Biden and mostly bashes Trump rather than communicating the president's accomplishments, which is ironically what Hillary Clinton did as well. On the pod, Piker explains his and his young audience's disenchantment with Biden and their sense that the president has walked back many of the promises he made to them in the last cycle. If I'm young, I don't see anyone right now that is captivating me, Piker told us. Pollsters and strategists like to make the case that Biden won the last election in part to the young voters that turned out to him, but over the past few months, polling has suggested that their support is wavering. A new set of New York Times Siena polls out this week also claim that in every battleground state except Wisconsin, Biden is polling behind former President Donald Trump, and the youth vote could be a large reason why. Streamers like Parker are arguably some of the most influential creators on the internet, and there's no doubt that they could have a real impact on 2024. Earlier this week, I spoke to Samuel Drzmala, the founder of Progressive Victory, a liberal group that works for streamers to get out. Streamers on Get Out the Vote initiatives told me that Twitch's format allows for the kinds of back and forth that can change a person's mind. Definitely think Hasan is a decent representation of young voters this time around. I mean, guys, the young voter percentage, like the young voter participation rate barely hits 30%. And when it does, it was under Obama, and they brought it up on the podcast as well. Like that was seen as an impressive feat. Like think about that, 30%. So young people don't vote for a multitude of different structural hurdles, something that I also mentioned on the podcast. And those are areas that we have to solve, like, universal ballot registration and things of that nature that like ease access to voting for everyone. Yeah, Progressive Victory is actually Brianna Wu's, or formerly, I think Brianna Wu was there. I don't know if she's still there or not. But anyway, told me that Twitter's format allows for the kind of back and forth to change a person's mind. Long-form discussions allow for a lot of nuance and detail to be discussed and creates a greater understanding. Like these people are educating their audiences when they choose to speak on issues. Progressive Victory's approach to moving online activism into IRL has proven successful. In a recent Ohio canvassing event, the group was able to bring together 20 streamers and 300 volunteers to knock on 40,000 doors for the state's progressives. They built communities around their personalities and the way they speak to their audiences, Drzmala said. The live nature allows for creators to make really compelling asks to their audiences, can get people to take crazy amounts of action. Unlike Drzmala's group, Piker focuses more on issues advocacy than electoral politics, though he will sometimes encourage followers to vote in down ballot elections. His largest priorities are the causes he cares about. I think my impact is way more important when it comes to Chipotle unionizing Lansing, Michigan. I went to the UCLA encampment, and all the SJP and JVP students I met were like, I'm here because I started watching you in 2020 and really broadened my horizons, Piker told us. That impact won't be reaching the Biden campaign anytime soon. The Biden campaign declined to comment on what Hasan said about voting, but it has made, dude, that is so funny to ask the Biden campaign what they have to say about my statement on voting. It's like, I doubt that they care. And why should they really? I mean, they shouldn't. I am insignificant in the grand scheme of things, right? But it's made significant investments in his relationships with supportive influencers, and we've talked about them multiple times in this newsletter. But is a video with Luke Skywalker more effective than deeply engaged online communities? I guess we'll find out. But they have people like David Pakman at the White House, so they should care more about you. Of course, they're going to have someone like David Pakman at the White House. David Pakman is the perfect independent content creator. He's very safe. Like David Pakman, and I'm not even like saying this as a diss, mind you, okay? Like I've known David for many, many years. He has always been a very cordial person. And especially when it comes to like the State Department line, he oftentimes does not stray away from what, like, on American foreign policy, there's not a lot of disagreement with David Pakman and, like, you know, those in positions of power. So I think that that's like a major difference. And I have no issues with David. You know, he can have his own opinions. I think that he's a very respectful, and I appreciate that. He's very cordial, and I appreciate that. We do definitely have a lot of severe disagreements when it comes to American foreign policy. Beyond that, when it comes to domestic issues and stuff, like David Pakman and I are fairly aligned, I would say. Like I said, I've known him for many, many years. I don't know what his like latest opinions are. I'm talking like many, many years ago. So that's the article accompanying the actual podcast. I hope that because they filmed it, so I think that it'll be on there as well. I listened to it on Spotify. It was really good. Hell yeah.